que consistia este ritual?
Como que começou? Desde a primeira hora, vocês combinaram para ser feito esse ritual?
A barriga dela.
Abriu a barriga dela? Paula feriu o Evandro, abrindo o seu peito?
Alright, so let me tell you about one of the darkest and most confusing cases to ever come out of Brazil. And when I say dark, I mean this is one of those stories where every detail makes you stop and go, wait, what? This is the story of Evandro Ramos Caetano, a 6-year-old boy who, in 1992, went missing in a small beach town in southern Brazil. He was literally just walking home, a short little trip he'd done 100 times before. But this time, he didn't make it. 5 days later, they found his body in the woods, and what they found, it didn't look like some tragic accident. It looked like something out of a nightmare. Parts of his body were missing, his organs were gone. People immediately started saying this was witchcraft, that it was a ritual killing. But here's the thing, as horrifying as that sounds, the real nightmare was only just beginning. Because what happened after, the investigations, the confessions, the leaked tapes, the way the internet brought this case back decades later, it all turns the story into something way more twisted than anyone could have imagined. So yeah, buckle up. This is the case of little Evandro, also known as the Witches of Guaratuba. Alright, so first, let's set the scene. Guaratuba is this small seaside town in southern Brazil, in the state of Parana. Back in 1992, it wasn't a tourist hotspot like Rio or Sao Paulo. It was quiet. Around 50,000 people lived there. Most families were middle or working class, and everybody pretty much knew each other. It's the kind of place where gossip spreads faster than the news, and religion and superstition played a big role in daily life. And remember, Brazil in the early 90s was a very different country. The dictatorship had just ended a few years earlier. The police, they had a reputation for corruption and brutality, and people generally didn't trust the justice system. Add to that a small-town environment where fear could snowball overnight, you've got a recipe for hysteria. Now, into that setting, you have 6-year-old Evandro Ramos Caetano, just a normal kid. He lived with his parents, a couple of siblings, went to school like any other child. His family wasn't wealthy or politically connected. They were just regular folks in a regular neighborhood. On the afternoon of April 6, 1992, Evandro's mum was at her job. She actually worked at a school, and she sent him home to grab a snack and one of his toys. It was only a short walk, less than 150 meters. He'd done it plenty of times before, but this time, he never came back. At first, she thought maybe he stopped at a cousin's house, or maybe he just got distracted. But when she got home a little later, she found the door still locked, his snack untouched, and his toy still sitting right there on the table. That's when the panic set in. The neighbors joined in. The whole community started searching because in a town like Guaratuba, when a little boy disappears, everyone feels it. The local police got involved quickly, though, as you'll see, their involvement would create more questions than answers. And after 5 days of searching on April 11th, a worker walking near a wooded area on the outskirts of town made a gruesome discovery. It was Evandro, and what they found was so disturbing, so unlike anything the community had ever seen, that it changed Guaratuba forever. When the worker found the body in a thicket just outside Guaratuba, the condition of it was absolutely brutal. His throat had been slashed. He had bruises and trauma all over. His eyes, ears, genitals, hands, and feet had been cut off. And get this, his intestines, liver, and even his heart were missing. It was like something out of the darkest nightmare. He was identified because a few things still matched up, like the shorts he was wearing, a little birthmark on his back that only his dad would have recognized, and even a key from home found on him. This wasn't just sad, it was surreal. The town was reeling. Newspapers immediately splashed headlines calling it the Witches of Guaratuba case. People were scrambling for answers and for someone to blame. Now, remember, Brazil in the early 90s wasn't exactly a trust the police kind of place. And this case? It was toxic from day one. Within hours, authorities announced they'd arrested 7 people, some allegedly tied to an Afro-Brazilian spiritual house, and others linked to the mayor's family. So this was the scene of the crime. A boy's body found in the woods with signs so grotesque they shattered a community's sense of reality and set off a witch hunt, literally and figuratively. So, here's where things start getting messy. The kind of messy where you realize this isn't just about a murder anymore, it's about fear, politics, and power all crashing together. Right after Evandro's body was found, the cops didn't waste time. Within days, they had rounded up 7 suspects, and not just random people either. We're talking about folks who were connected to some of the most powerful families in town, including the wife of the mayor of Guaratuba at the time, Beatriz Abage, and her mother, Celia Abage. And here's the kicker. The narrative police pushed was that this group of people was part of some kind of satanic sect. The theory? They'd killed Evandro in a ritual sacrifice to gain power, prosperity, and influence. Sounds like a movie, right? But in Brazil back then, especially in small towns, people were already suspicious of anything tied to Afro-Brazilian religions or rituals. So once that rumor hit the streets, boom, it spread like wildfire. Suddenly, it wasn't just a murder investigation. It was witches, it was devil worship, it was black magic in the middle of a sleepy beach town. And honestly, this is where the tragedy kind of doubles. Because on one side, you had a family grieving their little boy, desperate for justice. And on the other side, you had other families suddenly being branded as monsters, as witches, their lives torn apart overnight. Imagine being in a small town where everyone knows your name, and suddenly the newspapers are calling you a child-killing cultist. So, the police had their suspects, 7 of them. Celia Abage, the mother of the mayor, and her daughter Beatriz Abage. Alongside them, 5 other townspeople were accused of taking part in Evandro's death. And then came the big moment. Police announced they had confessions. According to them, the suspects admitted to being part of a ritualistic killing, a satanic sacrifice. The story that came out was chilling, that Evandro had been lured away, taken to a ritual site, and mutilated as part of a black magic ceremony. Suddenly, the whispers around town weren't just rumors anymore. They had proof. Or at least, that's how it was presented. And remember, this was 1992. Brazil was in the middle of a wave of paranoia about satanic cults and ritual crimes. So when those confessions hit the front pages, it was like throwing gasoline on a fire. The press called it the Witches of Guaratuba. Churches preached about devil worship. And the community? They were convinced. The case was solved. And those confessions didn't just shock the public. They shaped everything that followed. They became the backbone of the prosecution. Over the years, trials and retrials leaned heavily on them. In 1998, 6 years after Evandro's death, 3 suspects were convicted: Osvaldo Marcinero, Vicente de Paula Ferreira, and David Santos Soares. They got sentences of more than 20 years. Meanwhile, the Abages were acquitted in that round. But it didn't stop there. In 2003, Beatriz and Celia finally went to trial themselves. And this time, they were convicted too. Both spent years behind bars before managing to appeal. So yeah, for the public watching all this unfold, the message was clear. The witches were guilty. The court said so. The confessions said so. The headlines said so. And with that, Guaratuba, at least on the surface, could breathe again. But here's the thing. Those confessions that carried so much weight, that sent people to prison, and that convinced an entire country the case was solved, they weren't exactly what they seemed. And decades later, the truth about what those confessions really sounded like would finally come out. So for years, that was it. The confessions stood. People were tried, convicted, acquitted, retried. The whole mess of a justice system kept spinning. But at the center of it all was one thing: those statements. But decades later, The truth about those confessions finally came out, and when it did, it shocked Brazil all over again. Because hidden away all that time were the actual recordings of those interrogations. The tapes where those confessions were made. And when they leaked to the public, people realized they weren't listening to suspects confessing. They were listening to suspects being tortured. You can hear it, the screams, the crying, the begging, police shouting threats, feeding them lines. And the suspects? Eventually, they just repeat what they're told, broken down, just trying to make it stop. That's what those so-called confessions really were.
Quem que retirou o sangue da criança?
O de Paula.
Como que ele fez?
E cortou o pescoço da criança.
Ele cortou, estrangulou o pescoço. Você o que fez?
Eu não fiz nada, fiquei olhando.
Você segurou a criança.
Tá, eu segurei a criança. Ai, inventando isso, você sabe.
Conte, cara.
Você sabe, foi tirado os olhos, você quer que eu não...
Como é que não quero que você me fale, como é que era? Foi tirado o quê?
Aí nós saímos, porque ele falou que nós não podíamos ver que isso era magia negra. Eu e minha mãe saímos.
Tá, e como é que foi? Quem que segurou a criança enquanto você estava? Os quatro, todos vocês seguraram?
É, nós quatro seguramos.
E daí?
E daí não, três, né, porque o de Paula que estava fazendo, três seguraram, pronto. Tá bom, eu boto tudo no papel.
Você é prisioneira minha, eu vou levar você pra Curitiba. Se você não confessar direitinho que você está falando pra mim aqui, chegar na hora de você mudar a história, você vai conversar comigo de volta.
Tá. E minha mãe confirma, eu posso falar com a minha mãe?
Não, depois você fala com a sua mãe. Se você confirmar direitinho... Tá, mas eu vou dizer, vocês vão dizer que não é. Não. Se não for, se não for, eu tento lembrar de novo, mas
tá,
não tudo bem. Fazer nada mais comigo. Tá. Vai. Posso levantar a cabeça um pouquinho, meu cabelo descansa?
And suddenly, everything made sense. Why the trials kept collapsing. Why some suspects were convicted, then released, then retried again. Why nothing ever stuck. It was because the entire case was poisoned from the very beginning. The backbone of the investigation wasn't evidence, it was torture. And then, in 2018, journalist Ivan Mizanzuk released a podcast called Projeto Humanos, or Caso Evandro. And that podcast, it blew the case wide open. For the first time, anyone could hear those tapes, anyone could read the court records, see the autopsy reports, watch the old TV broadcasts. Stuff that had been buried for decades was suddenly everywhere. People got obsessed. Whole forums dedicated to theories, YouTube breakdowns, Facebook groups sharing documents and translations. It was like the case came back from the dead. Only this time, it wasn't police or politicians running the show. It was regular people, connecting the dots online. And honestly, they did a better job than the system ever did. And the thing is, this changed the way people saw the whole story. For years, Brazil believed in witches, rituals, satanic sacrifices. But once the tapes came out, the real horror wasn't black magic anymore. It was the justice system itself. So yeah, those confessions that everyone thought solved the mystery, they turned out to be the biggest lie of all. And the fallout from that lie left scars that still haven't healed. So once the truth about those confessions came out, the entire case basically collapsed in on itself. Trials that had dragged on for decades suddenly looked worthless. Judges had to admit that the backbone of the prosecution, those so-called confessions, were rotten from the start. And you could see the chaos in the courtroom. In 1998, 3 suspects were convicted and given more than 20 years in prison. In 2003, Beatrice and Celia Abage were convicted too and sent to prison themselves. Then, years later, appeals overturned some of those convictions, and by 2011, even the Paraná State Court admitted, yeah, these verdicts can't stand. It was madness. One year someone was guilty, the next year they weren't. People served years behind bars, only to be released, then retried, then acquitted again. It was this endless legal merry-go-round, and honestly, nobody won. Evandro's family spent decades stuck in limbo, never really knowing what happened to their boy. And the families of the accused? Even when they were acquitted, they were ruined. In a small town like Guaratuba, once the press has called you a witch and a child killer, you don't get your old life back. By 2016, Brazil's Supreme Court basically confirmed what everyone who heard the tapes already knew. This case was tainted beyond repair. The torture had poisoned everything. And yet, despite all the trials, retrials, and chaos, no one could say who actually killed Evandro. So in the end, the justice system didn't solve the case. It just dragged out the suffering for 30 years. A little boy lost his life, innocent families were torn apart, and the truth? Still out there, somewhere in the shadows. And that's what makes the case of Evandro Ramos Caetano so haunting. Because it leaves you with the worst kind of ending. One where everyone loses, and the real answers never come. So, here's the million-dollar question. If those confessions were fake, and the trials fell apart, then who actually killed Evandro Ramos Caetano? Because the truth is, nobody knows for sure. But over the years, a few theories have stood out. Let's go through them. Theory 1. The ritual sacrifice. This was the original story, right? That Evandro was taken by a group of witches, the Abages and others, and used in a satanic ritual. The missing organs, the mutilations, the timing of his disappearance. For a lot of people back then, it just fit. And let's be real, in 1992 Brazil, rumors of satanic cults and ritual crimes were everywhere. Newspapers were full of it. Evangelical churches preached against it. So when the police said, "Yep, we caught the witches," most people didn't question it. But today, after the torture tapes came out, it's almost impossible to take this theory at face value. Unless there's some hidden evidence we've never seen, it looks more like a convenient story than the truth. Theory 2. A cover-up. Another theory is that Evandro's death was actually an accident, or maybe even a random killing. But because of who was involved, or who the real killers were, the authorities covered it up. Think about it. The suspects chosen weren't random. They included political rivals, people who could easily be thrown under the bus, and people connected to the mayor's family. Some believe the whole thing was a way to protect someone powerful while giving the public a scapegoat. And if that's true, then the torture, the forced confessions, the show trials, it all starts to make sense. They needed the case solved fast, and they didn't care how. Theory 3. Police involvement. Some researchers and online sleuths have gone even further, suggesting the police themselves might have been directly involved, whether in the crime or just in covering it up. The brutality of the torture, the way evidence went missing, the inconsistencies in the investigation, it's suspicious. It doesn't mean cops killed Evandro, but it does raise questions about whether they were hiding something bigger than just bad police work. Theory 4. The mystery stranger. And then there's the simple but haunting idea. Maybe the real killer was never caught. Maybe Evandro crossed paths with a stranger, someone passing through town, or even a local who was never questioned, and the truth died with him. It's less dramatic than witches and rituals, but sometimes the scariest answer is the simplest one, a random act of violence that will never make sense. So which one's true? Honestly, we don't know. The ritual theory doesn't hold up anymore. The cover-up theory explains a lot, but it's never been proven. And the idea of a random killer is terrifying, because it means this whole tragedy was for nothing. But here's the thing. 30 years later, we're still asking the same question. And maybe that's what makes this case so haunting. Because in the end, it's not just about who killed Evandro. It's about how a country failed to find the truth, and how the scars of that failure are still there today. So after everything, the trials, the torture, the leaked tapes, the theories, what's left? A little boy, 6 years old. His name was Evandro Ramos Caetano. He was just walking home to grab a snack and a toy, that's all, and he never came back. 30 years later, we still don't know exactly what happened to him. The people accused lost decades of their lives in courts and prisons. His family lost their child and any chance of closure. And the town of Guaratuba? It'll always be haunted by what people now call the witches of Guaratuba. But maybe the darkest part isn't the crime itself. It's that after all the pain, all the accusations, all the chaos, the truth was never found. And in that silence, everyone lost. So next time you hear about the case of Evandro Ramos Caetano, remember, behind the headlines, the witch trials, the podcasts, and the conspiracy theories, there was just a little boy who never made it home. If you found this story important, let us know what you think in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for more cases like this, and thanks for watching.